So let me show you a few examples of these plates and why they are so significant. The plate on the left is the one where the transients were discovered. The plate on the right came about an hour later. As you can see, the transients, which are marked by blue circles, disappeared shortly after being photographed. In addition to that, several of them are closely arranged in a line formation, very similar to the way satellites in a constellation would appear, assuming satellites actually existed in the 1950s, which they did not, at least not in the early to mid-1950s when all of these photographs were taken. In addition to that, these examples cannot be meteors, nor can they be asteroids, nor can they be supernova or any other type of phenomena. Asteroids moving quick enough to disappear in only an hour would leave a streak on a time exposure photograph, not appearing as a pinpoint. The only thing that would appear as a pinpoint in the night sky that would disappear in an hour or so would be something that was sitting in geosynchronous orbit, which then departed geosynchronous orbit before the next photographs were taken, or perhaps the objects rotated in such a way that they didn't reflect sunlight in the same way as they were when they were photographed the first time. This is the second candidate. There are 4 transients in this one, and as you can see, 3 of those transients are arranged in a line, with 2 of them appearing very close to one another. Again, something that is completely unlike a meteor phenomena or asteroids. Definitely nothing like supernova. You won't ever have 4 supernova taking place at the same time, and also supernova don't disappear in less than an hour. There is no known natural phenomena that could account for these transients appearing and disappearing in an hour's time. However, there is one man-made possibility to this phenomena, something created by humans that theoretically could cause these transients to appear in these photographic plates, and that is the nuclear tests that have occurred in greater frequency in association with these photographic plates than these transients appearing when there were no nuclear tests. Radioactive contamination can sometimes cause these sorts of flaws to appear in photographic plates. However, if that were the case, then that means these transients should be appearing completely at random. Radioactive contamination has no perceivable pattern. They shouldn't be occurring on a line or in any kind of formation, and most significantly, these sorts of transients should also be appearing in the Earth's shadow. Radioactive contamination could give a damn as to where the Earth's shadow happens to be when the photograph was taken, and yet these transients do not appear where Earth's shadow would interfere with their appearance. That is to say, Earth's shadow would obscure any sort of object reflecting sunlight in orbit, and on all of these photographic plates, almost none of the transients appear where Earth's shadow would interfere with it. Again, this completely eliminates radioactive contamination as being a possible culprit for these transients. Again, we are left with nothing but artificial phenomena taking place in orbit, or some sort of extraterrestrial natural phenomena that we have never observed anyplace else. And the candidates go on and on. This is figure 4 as it is described in the paper, and it shows 6 transients, 4 of which appear in a line formation. Again, very similar to a Starlink constellation or some other satellite formation, although you have in 2 cases 2 transients appearing very close to one another. Again, a very strange phenomena that theoretically might be caused by gravitational lensing. That sometimes can create duplicates in the same photographic plate, but again, gravitational lensing of what? Of a supernova? That again is impossible. That shouldn't have disappeared in only an hour. These sorts of things can only be attributed to artificial causes, at least as far as astronomical phenomena that we are currently aware of. Now, perhaps my favorite example is candidate number 5, which has 5 transients, but all of them are clustered into the same formation, all arranged on a line, with 2 transients appearing very close to one another at one end of the line, and 2 more transients closely clustered at the other end of the line. This looks beyond artificial, not just to me, I think to just about any reasonable person. This cannot be anything natural. 5 objects appearing in the same formation, 4 of which appear in pairs. As a matter of fact, if you measure the distance from one pair to the center object and then from the other pair also to the center object, you will find that these objects are almost equidistant from the center. That also is an amazing coincidence. Again, in my opinion, not a coincidence at all, but an artificial formation in orbit. Again, it has to be in geosynchronous orbit. If it were in low Earth orbit, it would leave a streak on a time exposure photograph. If it were in the atmosphere, it would also leave a streak. The only way that these objects can possibly appear in these plates, in these beautiful pinpoints of light that, as I say, vanish an hour later, is if they are highly reflective objects traveling in geosynchronous orbit and therefore stationary in the sky relative to the stars moving around them. That's the only solution that makes any sense with what the team observed in the Mount Palomar plates. Now,
that's neither here nor there. Let's move on with the story itself. The story takes even a darker turn at Harvard University between 1953 and 1968. There was a mysterious 15-year hole in Harvard's vast astronomical plate collection known as the Menzel Gap after director Donald H. Menzel. And as we covered on Saturday's show, or Friday's show on this one, when Dr. Menzel came in and took over the astronomy department at Harvard, one of his very first tasks that he put out there was the destruction of specific series of plates of glass that had this information recorded, like he was trying to go ahead and erase portions of history, like there was something there that people shouldn't see. Now, it should be of no surprise to our viewers that, of course, Menzel was also associated with the intelligence community.
Agency.
Hey, Mike?
Yeah. That's correct. He was an intelligence asset for the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Which is no surprise. When he took over Harvard Astronomy, he destroyed thousands of those irreplaceable plates.
Yep. But luckily, Beatriz tracked down another set of plates that were taken at Palomar, doing the same thing. Palomar Observatory in San Diego, California, we believe. Yes. There was additional data that she's been able to go ahead, get scanned in and analyzed manually and with AI to try and figure out what's going on.
Correct. And that's how she was able to make these discoveries based on that information.
Yep. So, as back in 1953, just these anomalies were being recorded at Palomar, Menzel abruptly halted Harvard's plate program. He ordered the destruction of hundreds of thousands of plates without even examining them. These plates, or pictures on glass for that matter, would have covered the exact years of Beatriz's study, identifies as crucial. So it seems like he knew what was going on, went in there, deleted this, destroyed the stuff, effectively removing it from history. Now, the important thing to realize, hasn't Harvard's survey gone back like to the 1800s, Mike?
Yes, I think 1888, Thomas.
Yeah.
So all of that information can't be recovered. And we talked about this, like you said on Friday's show. He was smashing the glass plates at Harvard to remove any chance that anybody might discover this like Beatriz did.
Yeah.
It's actually a tragedy.
As Lloyd calls it in the back, crimes against humanity.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, trying to keep our,
Criminal.
it's like trying to pull the wool over our eyes continually. Hide the evidence that the general public, oh, you don't need to know this stuff. Just keep on, following our orders. It's our government. We control everything. There's nothing else going on. Nothing to see here, folks, when clearly there is.
Right. And Beatriz was able to discover it, even though the U.S. government has tried to hide this for the past 75 years. It's disgusting.
Yeah. So Menzel wasn't just a scientist, as we just said. He had deep ties to the U.S. intelligence and was a loud public UFO skeptic. The timing is uncanny. It's remarkable for that matter.
And I'm a right brain person, imagination. And we got to stop. This is great to discuss it, but it's like they're keeping physics and science and math hidden. They've figured all this crap out. And
yes. Okay, this is an example of many. You've probably seen some of these already. The craft is spinning. It's up close. It looks like a legitimate, authentic video, amateur video. And right about now, you're going to see a very fast acceleration. And that's what we've been talking about, folks. And the important part is that this introduces a concept which I'd like to share with the panel, and that is inertia is involved. And as we get to the next slide, hopefully we can see that. The inertial mass and gravitational mass are totally different. I repeat myself. Inertial mass and gravitational mass have nothing to do with each other. Einstein made a mistake years ago and called it the equivalence principle. I studied it even in grad school. I took relativity and I took general relativity. And so it's fascinating to me that it's sort of overlooked. Slide right after this. And the important part is that nowadays, inertia has been discovered to be a zero-point field Lorentz force by Fouche, Rueda, and Puthoff. This is a seminal paper that's so important that it opens the door to actually controlling inertia and understanding how any ET craft or UFOs could possibly have fast acceleration, right-angle turns, and maybe even travel through the universe. It turns out F equals V cross B, a simple Lorentz force at the bottom of the slide there showing how it works. So when we go around a curve and you feel that force moving you in the opposite direction, it's an electromagnetic interaction. Next slide. And this applies to relativity. I heard one of the gentlemen on the panels questioning special relativity. Well, that's inertial mass. That is the m in relativistic increase in mass as you go toward the speed of light. If you can shield inertial mass, miracles happen. And this is another demonstration. I showed this slide to the deputy director of the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, in case you don't know what NRO stands for. And this was very important because, as you see, F equals ma, Newton's law, can be modified. If m can be shielded and it lowers, then a could increase for the same amount of force. Next slide. Oh, and by the way, the NRO deputy director said, well, things like this tend to become more and more classified until they're out of sight. He says it's easier for us to reinvent it for a private contractor. And I said, you mean the taxpayers have to pay double for something like this? And he said, yes. So here's another proof of inertial shielding, and that is the right angle turn. That's photographed here with open shutter, 35 millimeter on tripod, 2 a.m. outside Stewart Air Force Base. The triangle craft started from the upper part, and the shutter was open, made a tremendous right turn, then continued as if nothing happened. Red and green lights make it look like it's conventional. Next slide.
And Dr. Valone, you've got about 1 minute.
I understand. I see. And now the conclusion is electrokinetic equation helps explain how we can combine electrokinetics or electrogravitics and inertial shielding. A pulsed current will produce a force. Next slide. And I wrote a book on the electrogravitics effect that's even present in the B-2 bomber, thanks to Paula Violette's work and research, and originally starting with Townsend Brown's research. Next slide. And the conclusion is, and I have to give thanks to Mark McCandlish, who gave a testimony at Dr. Greer's 2001 Disclosure Project in DC, since we know once in a while such electrokinetic powered craft are put on display, as this one was in 1988 in Norton Air Force Base, which is also, his entire testimony is reproduced, thanks to Mark, in my book Electrolytics 2. And this is also verified and investigated by Dr. Hal Puthoff, and I talked to him personally about this story of Norton Air Force Base showing 3 hovercraft, and he did his due diligence with it, and he says he put it in his gray box of possible events. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, what you need to understand is the gentleman I referred to and other people have confirmed this time period to me, that around October 1954, we attained gravity control. So gravity control meaning electromagnetic systems that affect an object so it becomes seemingly weightless, levitates, and corrects for gravity. Now, that research actually began with T. Townsend Brown and others in the 20s, if you look into this. And the Koloski-Frost experiment in Germany and others were using very high voltage, high frequency systems at certain hertz, cycles per second, that would cause a change in the atomic structure and the magnetic field in such a way that you could essentially cancel mass. Okay, so without boring people with a physics lesson, if you make something close to massless, no weight, but weight is different from mass, massless, then you can accelerate it at enormous speeds with very little power. And it can go right-hand turns, go up and down, and if you can control for the interior at 1G, in other words, 1 gravitational field, then you can go at 100,000 miles per hour, make a right-hand turn, and your brains don't come out of your ears, which was what would happen in a jet aircraft. So that work was being done in open source and then classified projects since the late 20s. The secret weapon that we had was the atomic bomb. The secret weapon Adolf Hitler was working on was this. Okay, and the so-called Nazi bell, they never got it stabilized. Now, so it would lift up and move around. We have video footage of it. It'll be in the film, actual footage. However, they never got it stable enough to do a lot with it. So Werner von Braun, Hermann Oberth, and others who'd worked at Pinatubo and these other facilities for the Germans in World War II were brought into, instead of being executed, like many Nazis were, they were brought into our intelligence community, into our aerospace community. And some of them, unfortunately, took it over from inside. So in a sense, we're living through the Fourth Reich. We defeated World War II, was the Third Reich, Nazis, but they learned to, instead of clumsily stumbling around doing it that way, they went subterranean. So the globe today is a Fourth Reichian fascist order. Now, I say this with no pleasure, and I am not speaking hyperbole. And that is the problem. It's a very huge problem. And there are all kinds of actors and players that have glommed on to that agenda, a bizarre collection of people from different walks of life and different agendas. We'll get into this later. But the secrecy around this issue has only been partial. They have been wanting a certain acculturation around UFOs and ETs for the purpose of having the public think that it could be true, but they don't really know what it is. So right now, more than half the public, over this longitudinal, long-term psychological propaganda warfare program launched in the 50s, believe UFOs are real. They believe there's intelligent life in the universe. But that's about where the granular knowledge ends. There's not a lot of granular knowledge, detailed knowledge of what all this is. And the truth is that this area of anti-gravity, let's call it, for pop culture usage, EMGs, electromagnetogravitics, gravity control. This became the focus of the aerospace industry and actually was reported open source in aerospace journals in the late 40s and early 50s, and then it went all black. This is a documented fact. Why did it go black? Because they finally figured out how to master it, and they didn't need to have more people joining in. So they wanted to close off that discussion. So in October 1954, gravity control was mastered, and we began to build various prototypes of what the public would call UFOs. And some were made to simulate the shape, appearance, and motion of an extraterrestrial vehicle. Because what better way to confuse people than to have something that looks almost the same? Is it gold? Is it fool's gold? Is it real? Is it Memorex? Get where I'm going here? This is how the spy masters operate. And luckily for them, and unfortunately for us, with the absence of the Fourth Estate and independent science and independent oversight from the public interest, the Commonwealth, they've been able to get away with enormous deception since the 50s. Which then brings me to the next issue, and that is by 1954, October, so now we're 61 years plus 1 month into an era, and this was confirmed to me by the third highest ranking official at the Naval Research Labs and the highest ranking scientist, in other words, someone who wasn't a bureaucrat, at the Naval Research Labs, which Thomas Edison founded, and the Naval Research Labs is the largest defense lab in the United States. And Richard Fouche, and I knew him for many years before he passed away of prostate cancer not too long ago, was this gentleman. I've never wanted to discuss who he was until he passed away. And he was a very senior guy in this system. And one of the things that he shared is that he was in the vault, the same vault that the next document came out of, which has a great story behind it. And he was going through some documentation and found that it wasn't in the 50s that we really started, I mean the 60s or 70s, but it was in the 50s that we actually mastered gravity control. Now what does that mean? Gravity control is the ability to put an electromagnetic field at certain voltages and with certain angular momentum. I don't want to get into a lot of, put you to sleep, I got into the physics of it too far. So that this object becomes massless, weightless, no mass, M-A-S-S. So the mass component, and this has to do with angular momentum and things of this sort, of the subatomic particles, can make this object so light that it has no mass, which means if you look at your physics equations, mass, velocity is inversely proportional to mass. Go look it up. So if mass becomes zero, velocity can go to infinity in a given amount of energy, which means you can move into another dimension. It doesn't go to infinity, you go trans-dimensional. We'll talk about this some more later. And this began to be experimented with in the 1920s. A guy named T. Townsend Brown developed a system using crystalline structures and very high voltages going into an object so that an object would begin to levitate. Marcel Vogel, one of the chief engineer scientists for IBM in North Carolina on the Reynolds estate, did the same thing in the 60s and 70s. One of the members of my team and one of our disclosure project witnesses worked with Marcel Vogel doing this with crystalline structures. And it can be crystals, but it can also be nanocrystalline materials such as metallic. So, as you know, most metals and rocks are crystal. Actually, water is crystalline. We're crystalline. So you can put this system around almost anything, and it will begin to become increasingly massless. Now, it doesn't have to be zero mass. Maybe it's 0.1 mass. So it's still materialized, you see it, but it means, man, can you accelerate this thing? So it means you can, instead of going like the space shuttle at 25,000 miles an hour, you can go at several million miles per hour and take a right turn. And there's no deceleration effect because everyone on board is corrected for 1g. So this is what they began, 1g gravitational force. So this is what began to develop in the 20s, got taken into some Army Air Force projects in the 30s and 40s, and was Adolf Hitler's secret weapon. Adolf Hitler, they weren't making the progress on the atomic bomb that we were, but they had almost perfected gravity control by the time World War II ended. Now, one of the things that the OSS did, the Office of the Special Services, which became the CIA after World War II, they had something, you can look this up, called Operation Paperclip. And Operation Paperclip, a whole book was written on it not too long ago, about how they would put a paperclip on the file of the Nazis that we didn't want to go to Nuremberg and execute, but whose knowledge was so great that we wanted them as part of our program. We wanted what they knew. So one of these guys is a guy named Werner von Braun, who, of course, invented the rocket, the V-2 rocket for Adolf Hitler. Hermann Oberth. These were all the giants of rocketry and aerospace for Adolf Hitler. They became the foundation of, brought in by the CIA, what became the CIA, of our space program in the 1940s and 50s, which is how we leapt ahead of the Soviet Union, because we took all those people first, ahead of the Soviet Union. Interesting bit of history. You don't read this many places, but a lot of what I'm telling you is in conventional history books, not the UFO part. That's been sanitized out. That's forbidden knowledge. So as a result, by the time we had those guys and the experimentation that had been done by T. Townsend Brown, whose work became a part of a corporation called the RAND Corporation, which still exists, a huge think tank, we really had something going. You add to this the study of material and electronics retrieved from interstellar vehicles that were shot down. So a lot of people say, oh, well, the things we have, are they all just reverse engineered from interstellar ET? I said, no. The laws of the universe are universal, and the mind of man, just like the man of an ET, can unravel the mysteries of the universe. And so it has come to pass. But if you we're not starting at zero when we retrieve the objects that were interstellar. We were starting with decades of research in classified electronics, electromagnetic fields, anti-gravity, scalar systems, et cetera, and so on, that had been going on since the time of Nikola Tesla, the true genius of the 20th century, not Albert Einstein, by the way. So, who is a minor luminary compared to Tesla. And, sorry, Einstein fans, it's true. By the way, that's why when Nikola Tesla died, the FBI swooped into his apartment and confiscated all of his secret papers. And how do I know this? I have a document from the Department of Defense demanding that the FBI turn them over and names them for what they are, the secret papers of Nikola Tesla. This is not an urban myth. I have that document. It came in this cache of documents I'm talking about. So when you have all of that knowledge, it's then augmented, increased, potentiated by the study of, as the Wilbur-Smith document says, the material that was interstellar. Because you need specialized materials. You need control systems. You need integrated circuits, which we did not have in the 40s, which came from this. You need fiber optics. You need all kinds of stuff. So some of the technologies, and this is where Colonel Corso, who worked on these projects tangentially, is correct. If you read The Day After Roswell, he says fiber optics, integrated circuits, and a whole slew of things came from studying the material from these crashed ET interstellar objects. So you had the biggest and most top secret, most well-funded project in the history of the United States going on. Nobody knew about it. It's completely sub rosa. It was more secret than the hydrogen bomb. And so between 1945 and 1954, the brain power of those Nazi aerospace folks like Wernher von Braun and Hermann Oberth, the work of T. Townsend Brown and others, Edward Teller, some of the brightest and most ingenious people in the world, bent their attention primarily not to the hydrogen bomb, but to gravity control and how are these interstellar visitors getting here? Because that would then be the ultimate edge, wouldn't it, in the technological arms race. You talk about a delivery system. You don't need an intercontinental ballistic missile that goes a few thousand miles an hour if you can deliver something instantly from one continent to another, or worse, from one planet to another. You begin to see the implications of this for national security. Therefore, it was managed in an extraordinary fashion. And the secrecy around it was increasingly ruthless. So much so that by 1956, the President of the United States, a man named Dwight Eisenhower, most of us drive on Eisenhower-era highways using 1880s Mercedes-type internal combustion engine cars that are run by fossil fuels, all of which have been obsolete since the 1940s or sooner. But Eisenhower was a five-star general, became president, two-term president, and was a Republican, very patriotic, but also very naively trusting. Jackie Gleason, the very famous comedian, his wife were friends with some folks that had been on my team before they passed away, and said that Eisenhower on his deathbed was a very bitter man over what happened to him between 1954 and when he left office in early 1961 when Jack Kennedy became the President of the United States. And in 1956, a man named Nelson Rockefeller, who later, of course, became vice president, and prior to that was an operative in the military-industrial complex and the emerging deep national security state, Nelson headed up what's called the Rockefeller Commission. And the Rockefeller Commission in 1956 reorganized the Pentagon, Department of Defense, CIA, the whole alphabet soup of secret entities. And they did so in such a way that it became labyrinthine, Byzantine, almost impossible to penetrate by anyone who wanted to navigate through it. In the early days, there was still some presidential knowledge. We have one of our witnesses, Mr. Lovkin, who is an attorney, who was a young man, White House Signal Corps here at the White House down the street from where we're speaking today. You can look at his testimony on our website, SeriousDisclosure.com, and he said yes, he would be at meetings and Eisenhower would be making doodles, pictures of UFOs and ET craft. In fact, I have one sitting in my condo here in DC that someone lifted from the archives. I won't say where and how. And he said basically Eisenhower voiced to him great frustration over the fact that there were all these projects going on and he had lost control of the oversight of them.
Using mercury would be also in a kind of a Schauberger type vortex, but you'd be using mercury instead of water. And mercury has many unusual qualities. It's an element, it's a metal, it's a liquid, it's a conductor. You can do things with mercury that you can't really do with any other metal or liquid or element, really. And that would be creating things like mercury gyros. And a mercury gyro would then be a sealed gyro with mercury inside it, moving as a liquid in a vortex or a gyroscopic kind of action. And then if you were to introduce electricity into that gyro of mercury, you would electrify that mercury and it would become a plasma, an electrified gas that's spinning in a toroidal or gyroscopic type movement. And scientists have used gyroscopes for years as an example of artificial gravity and anti-gravity. So in a sense, a craft that's using this kind of vortex technology, especially one with mercury, is a very viable kind of flying saucer type craft. And the other interesting thing about such a craft like that is that once you introduced electricity to the mercury vortex, it's going to light it up, and the thing will be extremely bright. So if you were to see this thing flying, it would be much as many UFOs are described.
All right, now I mentioned UFOs before, and if you listen to what Ed Fouche said, he said that the plasma accelerator was back-engineered. Right? What he means is that they recovered a downed flying saucer, they took it apart, and they found a plasma accelerator in there. So they started to build one themselves. They didn't quite know what was going to happen when they built it. They actually chained it down because they were expecting it to take off. Okay? But they couldn't get it to take off. They could only get it to reduce its weight by 89%. And that's why the triangle, that's why they made it into the shape of a triangle and put conventional type thrusters in each corner. What they were trying to do was make a flying saucer when they were developing the TR-3B originally. All right? And for those who have not researched the UFO subject, it might come as a surprise to you that UFOs are real. The evidence is voluminous for those who haven't looked into it. Right, now, I mentioned before that the craft uses what's called a plasma accelerator. And this is what I think it would look like if we were to look inside it. So we're looking at it, let's say if we go over the prototype one, which was 200 feet along each side, you're looking at a 100 feet diameter tube, which is about 10 feet across. So you could probably walk around this structure inside there when it's powered down. In there, they fill it with a mercury-based plasma, which is a gas which has become ionized. Pressurize it to 150,000 atmospheres, which is extremely high pressure, or in the operational models, 250,000 atmospheres, and it's then spun around in a circle at 40,000 revolutions per minute, so 40,000 RPM. Right? So what you've got in a plasma, you've got charged particles, and you've got them going around very, very, very fast in a circle. Now, a charged particle which moves creates a magnetic field. If you have charge flowing in that direction, you get a magnetic field at 90 degrees to it in that direction. So what you're going to get a magnetic field enveloping the whole craft of some phenomenal strength, which I'm going to come on to. Ed describes it as a magnetic vortex field. Now, the thing that enabled them to develop these plasma accelerators, allegedly, is the material that the device was made from, the thing that's withstanding this massive pressure. And he describes it as a foil-like material as thin as a plastic bag, which you can't cut with a knife. And they used 12 layers of it in this plasma accelerator. And this is what he talks about in this next clip.
Another friend who worked for General Dynamics in Fort Worth described a program in which he worked a plasma accelerator in the mid-60s, researching gravity warping techniques. He is a physicist by education and trade. This was his first top secret program. He described a foil-like material, much like that discovered after Roswell crash. He described the foil as 12 layers of material less than 10,000ths of an inch thick. It was as flexible as a plastic trash bag, but virtually indestructible to piercing, burning, or cutting, which you've probably all heard before. Here's what you haven't heard. In order to cut the material used for the project, the material was supercooled A large electrical charge was applied to polarize the molecular structure, and a laser cutter was applied in order to cut this material. Large ribbons of this material were used to reinforce the accelerator, which contained the mercury-based plasma that they started researching in 1965. The plasma was cooled to superconductive temperatures, rotated at 45,000 revolutions per minute, and pressurized at 150,000 atmospheres. This would be considered state-of-the-art technology even today.
All right. Now, in the next clip, he describes some of the characteristics of the craft, because they've made this plasma accelerator, they've got it to actually reduce its own weight. This magnetic vortex field is affecting the gravitational field around it, and is also presumably reducing inertial forces if the thing changes direction. So it's reducing its own mass. This is physics which is not in the white world. Anyway, he describes the characteristics in this next clip.
Was 200 feet across, the prototype. The tactical reconnaissance TR-3B first flight was in the early 90s. The triangular-shaped, nuclear-powered aerospace platform was developed under the top-secret Aurora program. By 1994, there were $3 billion-plus operational models. The operational model is 600 feet across. This flying triangle is not fiction. If you don't believe me, ask the tens of thousands of people who have now spotted one version or another of it, from Belgium to England. Ken can tell you about people who have seen it in England to Arizona. The TR-3B vehicle's outer coating is reactive to electrical radar stimulation and can change reflectiveness, radar absorptiveness, and color. The circular plasma field accelerator ring, called the magnetic field disruptor, surrounds a rotatable crew compartment. It's far ahead of anything you've ever imagined as far as technology. Sandia and Livermore Laboratories developed a reverse engineered MFD, and I believe the government will go at any lengths to protect this technology. The plasma in this accelerator is mercury-based. It's pressurized at 250,000 atmospheres at a temperature of 150 degrees Kelvin, superconductivity, and accelerated to 60,000 revolutions per minute to create a superconductive plasma with a resulting gravity energy. The MFD generates a magnetic vortex field which disrupts and neutralizes the effects of gravity on mass within proximity by 89%. This causes the effect of making an aircraft extremely light and able to outperform any aircraft yet constructed. TR-3B is a high-altitude stealth reconnaissance platform with indefinite loiter time. Once you get it up there at speed, it doesn't take much propulsion to maintain altitude. With the vehicle's mass reduced by 89%, the vehicle can travel at Mach 9 vertically or horizontally. So for those that have had sightings of things making right, and they're not perfect right turns, obviously. Nothing can make a perfect right turn. It's against the laws of physics. But it sure looks like a right turn at a distance.
So what he's saying is that the field generated by this plasma accelerator reduces the weight of the whole thing by 89%. So let's say you weigh 10 stone. If you're stood in the middle, you weigh 1 stone. All right? And the whole craft's weight is reduced. Now, let's ask the question, does this seem plausible? Is there anything in our physics textbooks that we can verify this with and say, well, is he telling us the truth? Well, here's a science paper from 2010 entitled Generating a Magnetic Field by a Rotating Plasma, 12 years after Fouche's initial disclosures. So, yes, it is possible to generate a magnetic field by rotating a plasma. But is it possible to use a magnetic field for propulsion? The Lorentz force is the magnetic force in physics. So in electric motors, you have two components which you pass electricity through. Each produces a magnetic field, and it's the force between those fields that turns your electric motor, your lawnmower, your washing machine, what have you. But can you use that force to make something float off the ground? It's not that easy, because the Lorentz force requires two components, one which pushes the other apart. So if you try to use it for propulsion, the component which is being pushed upwards will leave the thing that's pushing it. So it's a bit like trying to lift yourself up off a chair and float in midair. You can't do it. But according to Fouche, if you get the magnetic field strong enough and in this configuration of a magnetic vortex field, I would imagine it's something the shape of, because every magnetic field has a shape, it has topology, right? So the shape would be something like water going down a plug hole. And I suspect it requires a field which is of immense strength before it starts to affect gravity. And I'm going to come on to that now. Let's just ask the question, if we were able to rotate a plasma at 40,000 RPM, as Ed Fouche claims, what would the strength of the magnetic field? Now we can ask that question by comparing it to electricity in a wire. When you pass electricity down a wire, you get a magnetic field at 90 degrees to it, going around that wire. The further away from the wire, the weaker the field. All right? Now you can put your wire in a circle and allow your electrons to flow around in a circle, very similar to the TR3B. So you've got charged particles going around in a circle, just like the plasma accelerator, and it produces a magnetic field this shape all the way around the ring. So it's something like that that the TR3 is going to be generating. So B here is the magnetic field strength measured in Tesla. The equation for magnetic field strength for a charged particle flowing in a direction is given by this equation here. Mu naught over 4 pi times QV over R squared. Don't get frightened by that. It's not as complicated as you might think. Mu naught over 4 pi is a constant. Okay, so we can pretty much forget about that term. R is the distance from the charged particle to where you're measuring the field, right? So all this term means is the further away you get, the smaller the field. So we can forget that term. The two important terms is V, that's the velocity of your charge, the speed of your electrons, and Q, the number of electrons, how much charge is there. So in a copper wire with DC current flowing down it, electrons flow at 0.735 millimeters per second. Electrons will flow at 0.7 of a millimeter in 1 second. That's how fast electrons go down the wire, right? Now let's compare that speed, V, with a plasma in Fouche's accelerator. He said it was 100 feet in diameter, and he said it was going around at 40,000 RPM. That comes out at a speed of 64,000 meters per second compared to 0.0000735 meters per second. So the plasma, or the charged particles in the plasma accelerator, are traveling 87 million times faster than the electrons in a copper wire. So if the other factors in this equation were the same, it means that B, the magnetic field strength, is going to be 87 million times that of the field produced by a wire. Now let's look at the other term. So do we have the same amount of charge in a plasma though? Well, the charge in copper, or the electron density, is 8.4 times 10 to the 22 electrons in every cubic centimeter of copper. How does that compare with a plasma? Well, the electron density in a plasma depends on the type of plasma, and it depends on the temperature. But looking at this graph, if we just look at the electron density of 10 to the 22 here, right, we see that metals, or metal plasmas, exist at about, in other words, supercooled. Fouche said that the plasma accelerator was cooled to 150 degrees Kelvin. That's about minus 120 odd centigrade. So this is all making sense to me. The electron density of metals, because this was a metal-based plasma, it's a mercury-based plasma, supercooled, would produce a similar electron density to that of copper. So that's why they've probably got to supercool it, so that the plasma can obtain that particular electron density. So from those figures, I would suggest that the magnetic field strength using this plasma would be thousands of times higher than using wire and copper. Sorry, using wire and electricity. Now, this table here shows typical magnetic field strengths, fixed magnetic field strengths, because you can have pulsed magnetic fields, but I think we're talking about fixed magnetic fields. If you've got something going around in a circle at a fixed speed, the field is going to be fixed. It's not going to be pulsed. So a typical magnetic field in a power transformer is between 1 and 2 Tesla. Tesla is the unit of magnetic field strength. I particularly like this one. Where is it? Strength. Yeah, 16 Tesla is the magnetic field strength used to levitate a frog. Right, but the strongest magnetic field ever produced in a laboratory, this is a fixed magnetic field, not a pulsed one, ever produced in a laboratory is 45 Tesla. And that's it. So I think they're producing fields with the TR3B of thousands of Tesla. So there's no physicist can stand here and say to me, well, if you get a magnetic vortex field of, say, 10,000 Tesla, it will not affect gravity. They can't say that because they've never produced one in a laboratory. And the reason why they've never produced one in a laboratory is because they haven't got the materials that they used in that TR3B plasma accelerator. So has Ed Fouche taken all of this into account when he's made up his story? I don't think so. Now, they have produced pulsed magnetic fields in the order of thousands of Tesla, a few thousand Tesla, but they've blown the laboratory up. Because with a pulsed magnetic field, you get voltages induced, and they just blow everything up. But a fixed magnetic field, I think, is what we're talking about. So this is all adding up to me. And just to reiterate, no scientist can say to you that if you had a fixed magnetic vortex field of, let's say, 10,000 Tesla, that it wouldn't suddenly interrupt gravity, because they've never done it in a lab. Okay? Now, Ed said that these craft were capable of Mach 9, that's 6,900 miles per hour, not just horizontally but vertically. At that speed, from a standing start, you'd be in space in 40 seconds. A 600 feet triangle in space, in orbit in 40 seconds. And we were all shown the space shuttle on TV. 10, 9, 8, 7. It is a big, big con. Now, if we imagine that they've increased this capability, because we're talking about 1990 here, these capabilities. Let's say they've increased the capability by tenfold. You're talking 70,000 miles per hour, right? That would take you under 4 hours to get to the moon, and it would take you just 3 weeks to get to Mars. Now, if you've got a 600 feet platform that you can get to the moon in a few hours, you can put it on the surface of the moon, use it as a base, take it to Mars, take it to any planet in the solar system. Do you think that they're not going to do that? Or do you think they're just going to put it in a cupboard and let it gather dust? I think they've been there and they've got the T-shirt. One person who made claims about this in 1998 was a guy called William Hamilton.
This colonel is a real warrior type guy, and he had a degree in plasma physics. And he was also a consultant to NASA, and he was a consultant to people out at the Palos Verdes nuclear power generating station just 50 miles west of Phoenix. The other thing he said was there was a base on the moon. I find that quite astounding. I mean, I have heard astounding things, not only from this colonel, okay, but also probably the highest rank was a retired 3-star general, lieutenant general in the Air Force. And he knew another guy that I was in contact with, and this other guy claims that he worked 7 years on the U.S. anti-gravity program. And I have a fraction of what he told me, and I've got it tape recorded, is true. Whoa. What a sham the space program is. Because there's another space program going on. A secret space program. And that's what I was attempting to find. In fact, you don't have to go too far to find that there is some secret space programs going on, because they had their own shuttles and their own astronaut crews right out here at Vandenberg Air Force Base, unbeknownst to everybody, and they scuttled a $5 billion facility that was housed there at one time. That was back in the 80s. But the kind of space program he was talking about is using a spacecraft that can leave the bounds of our atmosphere and travel to the planet Mars at 0.8 C, 0.8 the speed of light. And I said, how do you know that? I've been there, he said.
All right, now we might ask the question, well, what the hell is NASA all about? If this stuff is going on, what are NASA doing? Well, I'm going to show you a clip of Barack Obama speaking at the Kennedy Space Center in 2010. And Obama is laying out NASA's program of work for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I just want you to consider technology for a moment, your communications technology, your mobile phone, and compare it to the 1960s and 1950s and how much it has advanced. It's incredible, isn't it, what we have now in communications technology. But compare that to propulsion. We had rockets that we could control and get into space in the 1940s. 1940s. NASA is still using rockets now. It seems that there's been no advancement in their technology with regards to propulsion. And I think it's because NASA is a cover organization which is just presenting technology to keep the public passive as to space and to not question about what's going on that the NSA and the Air Force are developing, because they're running the real space program, not NASA.
So anyway, I got into the system. I got all the drawers, bay drawers pulled out. I got the covers off everything. Schematics spread everywhere. And I'm running some different tests and everything. And then it seemed like there was a relay and an EEPROM, the programmable.
This is where the program is stored. The EEPROM is where the control program is stored for that card.
Right. So it seemed to be in that area. And the first thing I did is I check out all the voltages, of course, troubleshooting, and then the different frequencies, and it would tell you what you should see at each test point. So I checked the clock frequency just to make sure that the CPU was performing at speed, and it was 1 gigahertz. And I'm going like, well, that's impossible. So I took the access panel off of the what you would call nowadays a motherboard that had CPU in it, and the damn CPU was like this. It was huge. And there were like 2 or 3, it looked like smaller, very large scale integrated circuits on this board. And now you got to realize Apple was coming out with their Apple II Plus, which had a 1 megahertz, 1 million hertz clock frequency.
Yeah.
Around the same period.
Yeah.
Now this was a gigahertz, which is a billion hertz, which is 1,000 times faster.
More. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example, if you've got a 4 gigahertz processor now,
you're a factor of 1,000. So it would be it'd be 4,000 gigahertz now if it was the same, multiplication factor. But yeah, I mean, we didn't get a 1 gigahertz chip in the white world until 2000. I just checked this, and I think it was 1999 to year 2000 when the 1 gigahertz Pentium came out, for use in our own PCs and that. So, this was a difference of 23 years, wasn't it? Which sort of roughly ties up with this figure that people come out with, saying that, military technology is 20 years or more ahead of.
Well, what most people don't realize, a lot of people don't realize that the government, especially classified programs, have technology that's 20 or 30 years ahead of what's commercially available. The National Security Agency, under the R branch, which is research branch, owned their own factory where they designed and produced very large-scale integrated circuits and processors. I mean, they could build their own custom chips.
Yeah.
They were doing parallel processing 20 years before you could ever buy anything with parallel processing.
Right. Right.
So basically, it was quite interesting running across equipment that was that advanced, and
you'd not seen this anywhere else in anywhere that you'd worked. Nothing quite as advanced as this.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I'd never seen any type of, I'd worked on satellite communications gear, but it was all telemetry. But I had never worked on satellite communications that had, it was encrypted. It also had, that was modulated at the audio frequencies, which is voice.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. That it is voice frequencies. I mean, maybe we'll come on to what that might possibly be to do with later. But one of the questions I had, I mean, we'll obviously go on to the quasi-crystals, but before we go on to that, I just thought, when you were holding this board in your hands, and you're testing it all and stuff, I just wondered at what point you began to question things and, what the limits of this secrecy were. And obviously in 1998 you came out and disclosed. So was this one of the things that made you think, well, this is, why can't we have this more, for more people have access to this advanced technology? Was it at this point you were thinking that, or was that kind of later, or was it a more gradual thing?
Before that, I knew we had to have secrets and stuff classified so that our enemy, would have our stuff, or would have the best military in the world. So I thought it was, just the nature of the business, so to speak, that governments have secrets, and the bigger the secrets, the more effort they put into keeping those secrets. So it didn't bother me. But at that point, I'm seeing, for example, if you saw a computer that you could just, something like a lapel pin or something like that, and then it communicated directly with your brain or something. If you knew that was available, yet you're sitting there using a desktop computer, it would piss you off, because you're going like, hey, we've got all this advanced equipment, why can't we have it?
Yeah.
So it made me start thinking, it wasn't so much that the computing power of this system was so advanced, it was the fact that they had voice communications going on real time, encrypted with space. Well, you don't use voice communication with satellites.
Yeah.
It's all data.
So
all data.
So it's probably more the fact that you were looking at what the equipment was actually doing, what its function was. That's what made you think, this is a bit strange, rather than the technology itself, kind of.
I wanted to know who the hell we were talking to in space.
Right. Okay.
Think about it. We didn't have anything up there.
No.
Occasionally we'd send some astronauts.
I think Skylab was still going then, but obviously it wouldn't have been for that. So.
No. It's just, that would all have been going through NASA. This stuff was very deep Department of Defense.
Yeah.
Advanced programs, and it just nothing made any sense. It wasn't the type of equipment NASA used. NASA's like the old yellow school bus.
That's right.
The military's either put stuff in production and kept it classified, or they've handed it off to NASA to do further research because it didn't lead anywhere. So NASA doesn't get state-of-the-art, top-secret black program equipment. In fact, the original space shuttle, the F-16 had newer avionics systems than the original space shuttle.
Yeah.
Because NASA just didn't have the budget. The Department of Defense, through their different, the Air Force and Navy especially, control most of these advanced black programs. The money goes to these black programs, and the military controls it.
Another wave of black triangles appeared in Belgium in 1990. The Belgian Air Force scrambled F-16 fighters to try and intercept them, but were outmaneuvered every time. After days of activity, the Belgian Air Force had no explanation, and to this day still have no explanation as to the origin of the triangular UFOs. After the events, an investigation was launched, and the airborne radar tips from the F-16s were given to radar expert Professor Emil Schweitzer. Schweitzer ruled out any form of radar anomaly and concluded the radar systems were tracking real objects. calculations were carried out on the data, and in one maneuver the triangular craft turned a sharp corner, resulting in an acceleration of 30 g. That's 30 times greater than the Earth's gravity. This would be impossible for a conventional aircraft, and any occupants would be dead. Incredibly, in 1991, Schweitzer was asked by the British Ministry of Defence to come over to the UK to give British military chiefs a briefing on the movements of this unknown craft and explain the radar data. We know this because Schweitzer himself told researcher Harry Harris when Harris managed to get an interview with him in his hotel whilst in the UK.
What I found by calculations starting from the data recorded by the pilot, that the UFO made at one point of his trajectory a very strange motion, and during that very strange motion the normal acceleration was, let's say, above 30 Gs. Yes. So the trajectory was, first of all, the UFO was flying almost level, and then suddenly made a 90-degree motion. At that point, where he made a 90-degree turn, that point, the normal acceleration was above 30 Gs. Climbed almost vertically, and then descended obliquely to the ground. During the oblique descent, the UFO was flying supersonic.
Is it reasonable to assume that there couldn't have been anything living in that machine, that UFO, as we understand life?
I would say that with the present human technology, that's impossible.
The MOD have never publicly admitted they requested a meeting with Schweitzer. So he said, with present human technology, that would be impossible. I would change that. With present disclosed human technology, that would be impossible. Because I suspect that what we were seeing in the 1990 Belgian UFO flap was some version or other of the TR-3B. That's not to say that UFOs don't exist, because I think they do. And I'm going to come on to that. Now, okay, so let's have a look at Ed Fouche talking now. In this next clip, he talks about two space stations which have been put in orbit above the Earth that the NSA have not told anyone about. They haven't told the American government about them. And he also speaks about two different methods that the NSA had in the 1990s to go to and from these two particular satellites. One method was using the TR-3B, which I'm going to come on to. The other method was to use two conventional aircrafts, one on top of the other, the SR-75 and the SR-74. SR-74 would go on top of the SR-75, it would take off from a normal runway, it would go to a very high altitude and then would release the SR-74. The SR-74 could then actually get into space and go to these two space stations that they've not told anyone about. All right? But the SR-74 was not able to take off from the ground, so they needed the two conventional type aircraft with wings and jet engines to get this thing in orbit. So they don't need a space shuttle in order to get into orbit. And the TR-3B was the other vehicle that they were using to get into space.
Now, the NASA space shuttle, I'm here to tell you, is really an antique by comparison. The joke is on us. If you think these rumors are far-fetched, look at the YB-49 and the XB-70, flown in 1948 and 1964, respectively. Now look at the SR-75, which has been spotted numerous times. You say the government can't keep a secret? Boy, you're wrong. From my sources, two new vehicles have been placed in permanent orbit. One of these vehicles is the Space Orbital Nuclear Service Intercept Vehicle, SunCiv. When you hear it from another reliable source in 10 years, you'll remember this. It's codenamed Locust. The SR-74 and the TR-3B flying triangle can deliver spares, replacement units, service fuels, chemicals, and modules to the SunCiv, or Locust. The robotic SunCiv uses deliverables to service, calibrate, repair, and replace parts on the newer NSA, CIA, and NRO Ferret satellites. And I know for a fact that they were developing robotic repair of electronics equipment as far back as '81, because I worked a program to where they didn't want technicians looking at the equipment.
So this is in 1998, he's saying all this, and he's not really being given a platform to air these particular disclosures.
She always marks me with her lipstick.
You bet.
My mother once told me I was going to hell if I didn't change my ways, and judging from the heat around here, I think I'm pretty close. My name is Edgar Fouche. I'm here to speak about secret government technology, reverse engineering of alien artifacts, and the top secret MJ-12 committee, which I write with my author Brad Steiger. Brad, as you know, has published 143 books and has 15 million copies in print, which is pretty incredible. Before I'm through, you'll know exactly what the flying triangle is, the one that's been sighted around the world. It's the most exotic and classified aerospace vehicle that's ever been built. It may be stealthily hovering over Phoenix, Belgium, or your city. I'll show you pictures of Air Force aircraft I've worked, declassified Air Force aircraft, and classified aircraft that's never been seen before. I'll also explain how we come upon that technology. First, I'll share some of my family background. I was born to fifth generation French Americans, and many of my relatives for generations have been involved with the government in fields of intelligence, crypto, and classified development projects. This is true as far back as Joseph Fouche in the French Revolution, where he was the prime minister under Napoleon. He was the head of the French secret national police force and a direct ancestor of mine. Joseph Fouche started the first organized intelligence organization in the world. The CIA, the Russian KGB, the English MI5, the Israeli Mossad, and many other intelligence agencies have used and expanded upon his methods of intelligence gathering, networking information, and political survival. Some French historians consider him a scoundrel because he survived Napoleon and the King of France. My career background spans 30 years, and since the government isn't about to support my claims, you'll see from the positions I've held, the programs I've worked, that I was in a position to gather the information I'm presenting. My first job was as a machinist making bombs for the U.S. Air Force at R.G. Letourneau. I would be involved with the Department of Defense in one way or other for the next 25 years. After being drafted into the Vietnam conflict, I initially went through a year of intelligence, communications, and cryptological schools. During the years 1967 through 1974, I was stationed or worked at many of the Tactical Air Command, Air Training Command, Pacific Air Forces Command bases. During the Vietnam conflict, I was assigned to special projects at Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa, Udon Air Force Base, Thailand, Ben Hoa Air Force Base, Vietnam, and spent anywhere from a day to a month at many other Southeast Asian bases. With my training and experiences in intelligence equipment, special electronics, black programs, and cryptological areas, I received other government opportunities. I filled major command liaison positions, headquarters manager, DoD factory representatives for TAC, SAC, ATC, and PACAF. Later in my career as a defense contractor and engineering manager, I dealt with classified black programs, developing state-of-the-art electronics, logistics, and technical data, and automatic test equipment. I was considered an Air Force expert with classified electronics countermeasures, test equipment, cryptological test equipment, and automatic test equipment. I worked with many of the leading aircraft manufacturers and Department of Defense contractors. I participated as a key member in flight operational test and evaluation, design, development, production, programs, state-of-the-art avionics, including electronics countermeasures, satellite communications, cryptological equipment, and support equipment. During my career, I was handpicked development cadre for many of the Air Force's newest fighter and bomber development programs. I was cadre for the F-111 Swing Wing bomber, the F-15 Eagle Air Superiority Fighter, the A-10 Warthog Close Air Support Fighter. Next slide. The F-16 Falcon Fighter. Next slide. And the B-1 Lancer Bomber. Next slide. Other research and development programs I've worked as far back as the 70s are still classified top secret. I received over 4,000 hours of technical training from the military and the government, about which of half was classified. This is a picture of the Boeing F-22 Raptor, air dominance fighter. My involvement with black programs developing stealth aircraft is still classified. I am perhaps the only person who has actually worked at top secret Groom Lake Air Base within Area 51 of the Nellis Range and written about it and can prove it. I spent 20 years working directly for the U.S. Air Force and DoD agencies. That's a F-117 at Groom. Followed by another 8 years as a defense contractor manager. My last position for the Air Force was Strategic Air Command Liaison. As a defense contractor manager, I performed as engineering program manager and site manager for DoD contractors involved in classified development, logistics support, and electronics engineering. I am now CEO of Fouche Media Associates, which I run with my beautiful wife, Rebecca. I'm also the inventor of NeuroSync Mime, a behavior modification software using hypnotic entrainment and subliminal messages. I wrote Alien Rapture: The Chosen in 1994 and 95 after my last trip to California, New Mexico, and Nevada. I undertook this trip to do research for Alien Rapture, which included a meeting with 5 close friends who agreed to release confidential information to me and discuss their closely guarded personal experiences. Also interviewed other contacts who had worked classified programs, such as SR-71 pilots and engineers on black programs, and others who had flown classified development aircraft to gather information on UFO sightings and contact. At this point, I was blessed with teaming up with a great man and a great writer, Brad Steiger, who's a great friend also. I had decided to get out of the defense industry as I felt the fraud, waste, and abuse was rampant both on the government and contractor sides. I wanted to work for myself as a writer and develop my own ideas and products. So far, I've been a terrible boss. I've worked myself incredibly long hours with no benefits and a meager salary. Who were the 5 friends and co-conspirators, I like to call them, and a host of others, you might ask? The first friend was Gerald, a former NSA National Security Investigator and TREAT team member. TREAT stands for Tactical Reconnaissance Engineering Assessment Team. I think some of you call them Men in Black. He worked for the Department of Energy and the National Security Agency. This was his cover, but ultimately the National Security Agency controlled all his movements and everything he did. His job required him to watch employees with top secret and Q clearances and other classified clearances at the Nevada test site, the Nellis Range, Los Alamos, Sandia, and many other bases. He spent a lot of time out at Area 51 for years before I even knew what he was involved in. This is where previously the most classified aerospace testing in the world took place. You may know it as Groom Lake, Watertown, the Ranch, or Dreamland. He was found dead of a heart attack a year after our last meeting. The second friend, Sal, was a person who worked directly for the National Security Agency with Electronics Intelligence, or ELINT, and became a defense contractor upon his retirement. The third friend, Doc, was an SR-71 spy plane pilot and a U.S. Air Force test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base. The fourth friend, Dell, and I were in the service together during the Vietnam conflict, and I've known him since the early 70s. His father worked for the NSA for over 25 years, and he's the one that sent me the MJ-12 documents. I'll discuss the MJ-12 documents last. The fifth friend, Bud, was a DoD contractor, electronics engineer, worked top secret development programs dealing with electronics countermeasures, radar homing and warning, ECM jammers, and infrared receivers. He retired as a program manager and later died of a brain tumor within 30 days after his symptoms appeared. I also received input from 4 other SR-71 pilots, 2 U-2 pilots, a TR-1 pilot, and about 2 dozen fighter and bomber jocks. I got to the picture of the TR-3B, were a person in this latter group. At the time, I had no intention of writing about programs I was involved in due to the Secrecy Act and classification documents I had signed. I had my fill of working for the government and defense contractors. However, it bothered each of us that we'd had experience with unusual phenomena, extremely advanced technology, and witnessed unidentified aerial contact that had not been previously reported. As we sat at a table in a dark corner of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Las Vegas, discussing our experiences and swapping knowledge, each of the group of 5 assured me that they trusted me enough to write about their secrets and protect them. We agreed to get together the next year with an understanding that I would contact each of them and set up the meeting. In the meantime, I wrote down all of our notes and their input and their contacts from other friends about unusual phenomena and their personal sightings. Many of the things the group revealed to me were startling, even to me, who had worked 25 years on black programs. I used the information to piece together the story now titled Alien Rapture: The Chosen. I'm going to share some of these secrets and unusual phenomena with you this afternoon. The SR-71 was designed as a spy plane for the CIA in the 60s and designated the A-12. The Mach 3 Plus aircraft first flew in 1962, taken off from Groom Lake Air Base in Area 51. Later, once the Air Force took over the operation, it was designated the SR-71 Blackbird. My friend Chuck, an SR-71 pilot, related to me an in-flight incident he had in the 1970s. He was returning from a reconnaissance flight, was at an altitude of 74,000 feet and a speed of Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound. He noticed something flickering in his peripheral vision. Hovering over his left wingtip was a ball of dense plasma-like light. When he stared at it for more than a few seconds, it hurt his eyes. Chuck tried to use his UHF, VHF, and HF communication sets to no avail. There was nothing but static. Repeatedly glancing at the ball of light, he watched in amazement as it moved effortlessly about his aircraft. At one point, the light positioned itself a few feet in front of the spiked cone of the air intake inlet. The enormous amount of air rushing into the engines should have sucked in and shredded almost anything in its path, but the light orb was mysteriously unaffected. The light, he noted, acted in a curious manner, if something inanimate could act in a curious manner, or act in any manner at all. It moved from time to time to other parts of the aircraft, staying until its approach to Beale Air Force Base, California. It was inside of the air base when the plasma ball finally pulled away from the aircraft in a wide arc at ever-increasing speeds. Of course, after reading his incident report, his operations commander told him never to speak of this incident. When Chuck related the story to me, he was absolutely convinced this plasma ball was controlled by some form of intelligence. I have over 24 stories from pilots of similar incidents with UFOs and plasma balls. Have you ever heard stories about missing memory? Sal worked a program for 2 years in a top secret research facility in California. At the end of the program, he started having flu-like symptoms. And after several days of worsening symptoms, went to his company doctor. His company prescribed some medication and sent him home for 2 days. On the third day, he woke up and couldn't remember where he worked or who he worked for. He called his brother. His brother, in a panic, called up the company. The company informed him that his job had been terminated because his contract had run out. Sal was the SR-71 pilot I spoke of earlier. To this day, and I can't say to this day, I haven't heard from Sal in 2 years. The only thing he could ever reconstruct was from his pay records, letter of offer, and his personal notes, engineering notes, to convince him he actually had worked there. The company in question was involved in developing the TR-3B gravity disruption device called the magnetic field disruptor, which is the circular accelerator part of the TR-3B, which I'll go into more detail in a minute. Have any of you ever heard of the super strong foil-like material at Roswell? I'm sure most of you have heard something about it. Another friend who worked for General Dynamics in Fort Worth described a program in which he worked a plasma accelerator in the mid-60s, researching gravity warping techniques. He is a physicist by education and trade. This was his first top secret program. He described a foil-like material, much like that discovered after Roswell crash. He described the foil as 12 layers of material less than 10,000ths of an inch thick. It was as flexible as a plastic trash bag, but virtually indestructible to piercing, burning, or cutting, which you've probably all heard before. Here's what you haven't heard. In order to cut the material used for the project, the material was supercooled, a large electrical charge was applied to polarize the molecular structure, and a laser cutter was applied in order to cut this material. Large ribbons of this material were used to reinforce the accelerator, which contained the mercury-based plasma that they started researching in 1965. The plasma was cooled to superconductive temperatures, rotated at 45,000 revolutions per minute, and pressurized at 150,000 atmospheres. This would be considered state-of-the-art technology even today, some 30 years after he worked the project. 33, okay. Yeah. He related that the project achieved this objective. Instruments and test objects placed within the center of the accelerator showed a 50% loss in weight attributed to the reduction in the gravitational field. You'll hear a little bit more about this technology when I address the TR-3B and the magnetic field disruptor. From 1973 through 1976, I was home base at Edwards Air Force Base. It is near Lancaster, California, and even near the San Andreas Fault. Edwards has a long history of secret technology and experimental aircraft. It's a shame that's not clear. That's a B-2 stealth aircraft. It's a beautiful picture. The YB-49 was flown in 1948 at Edwards Air Force Base, which looks a lot like the B-2 stealth bomber. The XB-70 was first flown in 1964 and looks a lot like the new top secret SR-75 the Air Force says doesn't exist. Edwards is the home of the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School and is responsible for flight operational test and evaluation of the Air Force's newest aircraft. It hosts a number of tenant organizations, including NASA and a jet propulsion laboratory facility. I worked the F-111 Swing Wing Bomber, the F-15 Air Superiority Fighter, the F-16 Fighter, the A-10 Close Air Support Attack Aircraft, and the B-1 Stealth Bomber. I was involved with these and other classified development programs when they were just a gleam in some pilot trainees' eyes. One night, a longtime friend of mine and I were standing on top of the Fairchild A-10 hangar at Edwards Air Force Base. It was 2 a.m. and a perfectly clear night with millions of stars visible to the naked eye. This was a very common night at Edwards. I noticed a group of stars we were looking at seemed to be shifting in color. And at the time, I could name quite a few constellations. I'd just taken an astrology course, and I definitely knew what the Big Dipper was. I made a C in that course, I think, or a B. So I pointed out to my friend that the 3 stars near the Big Dipper in triangular formation were not supposed to be there. We watched as the strobing stars shifted in color from a bright blue to a reddish yellow. After a period of about 20 minutes, we could tell that the objects weren't stars because they were getting larger. This was somewhat unnerving. It was further unnerving when the space in between the stars started blocking out the stars in the background. We decided it probably was a top secret Air Force vehicle of some type. Still, we weren't sure. At the time, I didn't believe in UFOs. And that's the honest truth. The vehicle had gone from half the size of the Big Dipper to twice its size in a half hour. It had moved from the west to the east towards Edwards Air Force Base. About that time, we could make out the silhouette or outline of the triangle. The lights, or possibly exhaust, flared brighter and vanished in an instant from the sky. This experience wasn't my first sighting, but it was one of the few where I had a witness. In the summer of 1976, I relocated to Nellis Air Force Base, north of Las Vegas. I spent 3.5 years there. I worked primarily with the F-15 electronics countermeasures and automatic test equipment. I'd heard rumors of air bases located in the desert at places called Mercury, Indian Springs, and others that didn't even have names at the time. Before the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the USSR, no one talked about their classified work experiences, nor did we repeat rumors of top secret technology or aircraft. Most of us who had top secret clearances never even told our wives what programs we were working, or where we were going. I once spent 6 months in Vietnam while my wife thought I was at a classified school in Denver, Colorado. The military in a court of law has actually denied the existence of classified Air Force Base inside the Nellis Range, out in the Nevada desert, within Area 51. Don't you know the plaintiffs and the lawyer were surprised to hear this? But that's another story. I was one of the few personnel at Nellis who had top secret clearance with crypto access and was certified on specific NSA cryptological equipment. I was certified on the Mode 4 IFF system for aircraft also, which uses encrypted codes. It was due to a combination of coincidence and my technical experience and my certification that I was requested to be temporarily assigned to a place which had no name. I was told by my commander to report to an office on the base. He didn't know where I was going to be working or how long I was going to be gone. And he was pretty ticked off at me because at the time we were fielding the F-15 electronics countermeasures equipment, and it was critical. And I think to this day he remembers that. I left the first Monday morning at 4:30 a.m. before sunrise. We boarded a blue Air Force bus with the windows blackened out. There were 28 other people on the bus on the first trip, including 2 security policemen with M16s and a bus driver. There was only one thing said to us for the whole trip. When we got on the bus, they told us, do not speak. And when the bus closed the doors, he repeated, do not speak unless you're spoken to. Well, if you ever had an M16 pointed in your direction, you don't talk. So we just, and it was pretty bad because the windows were, you couldn't see anything. And eventually this fine silted dust started coming in the windows and you knew you were out in the desert. In the 1950s, the government started building the super secret Groom Lake facilities for the CIA's U-2 spy plane. It's located in the north central part of the Nellis Range and designated Area 51. Construction of facilities continues even to today, except mostly at Papoose and south of there. The SR-71, the TR-1, the F-117, isn't that a, can you back up one slide? Don't you know when it was really dark, a lot of people thought that was a UFO? Okay, next slide. And the B-2, that's not a B-2, that's an SR-75. We're tested at Groom. Now the top secret SR, back up just one for a second. Now the top secret SR-75, the SR-74, now next slide, and the TR-3B are operated there. Many of these aircraft have been misidentified as UFOs. When we reached Groom, the bus had pulled into an aircraft and they shut the doors. The security policemen dispatched the regular workers to their jobs. I was escorted to the electronics building with a sergeant who had an M16. I'm going to tell you something you've never heard before, and every person that comes after me that tells you they worked at Groom, I want you to ask them about this. Because no matter how much technology you work, or how many times you talk to people, you forget things. But you never forget discomfort. I was given a pair of heavy glasses to wear which can only be described as looking like welder's goggles. There is no peripheral vision. They have polarized lenses, and anything past 30 feet is blurred. It's like looking through your shower glazed glass. If an M1 tank barrel had been pointing at me at 50 feet away, I wouldn't have had a clue. That's exactly how they work. The whole time I was there, some 10 consecutive days first time, followed by numerous follow-up visits. The routine was the same. Leave Nellis Air Force Base before sunrise and return after dark. Only once did I get a glance at the whole base. They were getting ready to fly Class 10, and they flew me up in a helicopter, and I was supposed to wear the goggles the whole way, but I kind of peeked. I kind of shifted around, you know, like you do one of these things. So I actually got to look at it from the air. For those stationed at Groom or commuting there daily, the flight schedules are posted for classified flights. Everyone not cleared for that particular program or flight has to be indoors, and there are no windows where you can see out on the flight line or into other hangars. You have to be off the flight line and inside 30 minutes prior to any classified flight. As you know, a couple of thousand personnel are flown into Groom and Papoose and other facilities that they've now moved further south every day from McCarran Airport and Las Vegas and Edwards Air Force Base. Many people drive in from Tonopah to live north of the range. Other people commute through Mercury and Indian Springs from Las Vegas. While at Groom, I made contacts. Later met them again at Nellis Air Force Base or around Las Vegas over time and became friends with them and stayed friends for many, many years. On my third day of the job at Groom, I had to remove a module from a multi-bay piece of satellite communications equipment used to support special mission aircraft. I noticed while inside this bay checking out the wiring, I contained a steel unit about the size of a large briefcase. I noticed it had a National Security Agency ID plate on it. The nomenclature on the nameplate was Direct Orbital Communications Link, which I thought was strange as the unit was part of a digital communications link used solely to communicate with classified Air Force vehicles. I was unaware at the time of any military orbital missions not directly related to NASA. Remember that I'm talking about the late 70s. The space shuttle didn't fly until 1981. I disconnected the unit out of curiosity and removed the rear access cover. To my amazement, there were some half dozen large-scale integrated circuit chips with over 500 pins. This the inspection stat was 1975. So you have to visualize what we have today going back to 1975 when, did we even have TRS-80s then? It was about the size of a Zippo lighter. I believe the most advanced processor speeds the NSA had at the time were equivalent to IBM 8088 running about 4 million cycles per second. There was for any of y'all familiar with technology, this processor ran at 1 billion cycles per second, which is about 4 million, a billion, 250 times greater. Yeah, I think that's about right. I haven't figured this out. But the reason I knew it, the clock speed was 1 billion cycles per second. There was a clock synchronization jack on the back of this unit, a BNC connector, which was labeled. And I had a frequency counter, and I actually measured it. And I couldn't even working on black programs at the time, I couldn't imagine something that ran at 4 billion cycles per second when they didn't even have an Apple II Plus with 48K memory out there. And we had these clunker IBMs that were like 4 bays that only ran at 4 million cycles per second. Yet we had this one circuit card with modules on it. It's incredible if you know even the slightest bit about technology. In the Groom mess hall, I heard words like Lorentz forces, pulse detonation, cyclotron radiation, quantum flux transduction field generators, quasi-crystal energy lenses, and EPR quantum receivers. I'm not going to talk about quasi-crystals. I'll make a prediction. Quasi-crystals is the key to everything you wanted to ever know about how they got here. And that's all I'm going to say about it now. Except one of the quasi-crystals is the hydrogen crystal. I wrote down everything I saw, heard, and touched in my log every night. But as you would expect, the food was great, but it had to be. There was no cable, no alcohol, and no women. So everybody got fat. Later back at the base, my routine went the same, and I also had a part-time job at the Silver Dollar Saloon and Casino that Bill Ladd owned up until a few years ago and may still. I ran their security for him. I had this NSA friend, Gerald, that I mentioned previously, you may have forgot. He's the one that watched the people with highly classified jobs at the Nellis Range, the Nevada test site, and other areas around the Southwest. He was in a supervisor position and was way up in the NSA. But he liked the field jobs. He didn't like standing up around Fort Meade or any of the other places those guys in three-piece suits hang out. But his primary job was watching the people at Groom and the Nevada test site, where at the time they were still doing underground atomic tests, exploding bombs. He happened to mention a vehicle that was boosted into orbit and returned to land in the Nevada desert. It was an unmanned reconnaissance vehicle that took off from a B-52 bomber and used booster rockets to place it in temporary Earth orbit, low Earth orbit, for the purpose of taking reconnaissance pictures. I really thought he was feeding me a lot of bull at the time. And he said, this vehicle is remotely piloted and communications are made via the docile system at Groom. I'm not usually too slow, but it didn't hit me until he repeated, direct orbital communications link, DOCL. Bingo, the light bulb went on. I had seen a piece of the docile equipment at Groom, the one with the large chips in it. These are old pictures of the virtual reality lab at Brooks Air Force Base, where they developed the software to fly these classified, and by the way, they call them IPVs, independently piloted vehicles, not UAVs or RPVs on the black programs. After I agreed to, has there only been one of these showed? Okay. There. After I agreed with my friends to write the story, there was a lot of discussion on who would stick their neck out. I don't know what that tells you about me. But they were, long after we were researching this book, they stayed with the defense industry, and I got out. So I was the only one directly tied to them, so it fell on my shoulders. I talked to several military judge advocate general lawyers, or JAGs. Well, I actually did. I actually made appointments with them. And I told them I'd worked many classified programs and I wanted to write some fiction story that is technology based. I was told I couldn't name any real individuals with real clearances or covers or their working names, and I haven't. I was also told I couldn't discuss any details or technology of secret programs I had been personally assigned to, which I haven't done. Then I was told as long as I did that, I could damn well write what I wanted to, and I have. Of course, I didn't tell them I was going to write about the government conspiracy to cover up UFO contact and reverse engineering of government, reverse engineering of alien technology, or that I was interviewing SR-71, U-2, TR-1, and the SR-75 pilots that I made contacts with over the years and had flown classified aircraft. But I didn't think that was important at the time to tell them. You don't think that was important? But you know, you give the government too much information, they just screw it up. In the summer of 1992, the five friends and I, there were 6. See, when I run out of 5 fingers, I just get confused. I had completed my notes from our first meeting interviews. On my last trip to Nevada in 1994, without benefit of my friends, I wanted to use some information from some other retired military friends and cross-check my facts. Everything I've written about in alien rapture, I've got from at least 2 sources. I have a lot of stuff that I haven't written about, and I probably won't, that I couldn't verify. And every one of these sources, I either knew directly for 20 or 30 years who'd worked blank programs, or only talked to their closest friends that they'd also known for many years. We did not talk to one person that somebody hadn't known for at least 15 years. We didn't want any strangers appearing with information. We only trusted our closest friends. Bud, one of my co-conspirators, had informed me he had a cancerous tumor and was going through some serious depression. He died 30 days. It was just incredible. He found out on a Thursday that he was having numbness and dizziness. Went to the doctor, found out 3 days later he had a cancerous tumor, and 29 and a half days actually later, I talked to him the night before he died, he was gone. So this was a blow to all of us. He was our guru. The remaining 3 friends, Sal has dropped from the face of the earth. It's hard to define paranoia in a group of 6 people like we were at the time doing what we were trying to do. But Sal was the most paranoid, and he's called us up a little over 2 years ago and said, I don't know if you're going to hear from him again, because we actually had a publisher and were convinced we may have a chance of getting this out before the government set on it, so he just freaked out. I like to imagine that he's like on some island in the Pacific drinking Mai Tais or something, I hope. Let me talk about my friend Doc. He has a theory that UFOs seem to like fast aircraft. This SR-71 pilot, Doc, was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa, where the SR-71s were stationed on the SAC side of the base back in 1973. In fact, I think they still are. I was there last time in '81. While flying back across the South China Sea from a reconnaissance mission, he encountered a shadow over his cockpit. Doc said his avionics systems went totally haywire and he felt the aircraft nose down slightly, which can be dangerous at 2,000 miles an hour or 35 miles per minute. When he looked up, he was so startled that he almost panicked immediately. Made evasive maneuvers to his right and down, which is one of the maneuvers they make if there's a missile detected. Doc said the object was so big that it totally blanked out the sun. His estimate was it was 250 feet to 300 feet across. It was oval in shape, but he wasn't sure of the exact shape because there was a shimmering halo of energy surrounding the vehicle. About 3 minutes later, and some thousands of feet lower, the vehicle reappeared on his left wingtip. He tried his UHF, and all he could pick up was a deep electrical hum. He abandoned his attempts, made evasive maneuvers, and for the next 10 minutes, this thing moved about his aircraft effortlessly and stayed right on top of him. Doc said and I'm going to quote him exactly, Doc said he got this sound in his head, and his words were, like a swarm of bees in my brain, which is, it's an interesting, must be an interesting sound. The aircraft would move from the left to the right wingtip of his aircraft, and it would take about 2 minutes to move back and forth. When Doc returned from his mission, it was the same routine as the earlier incident I told you about. His commander drug him down to his office the minute he opened his mouth about the incidents and gave him a direct order not to talk about it, or they'd throw the book at him, and the book is the UCMJ. One of the interesting things that Doc related to me, being an SR-71 pilot and a U.S. Air Force test pilot, which is the elite in the Air Force are the test pilots. He said he didn't know one test pilot or SR-71 pilot or astronaut, and he can name most of them and give you their birthdays and their wives' names and tell you where they lived. He said he didn't know one that hadn't had some type of contact. But he also said he didn't know one that would ever come forward and be honest about their experiences for fear of retaliation from the government. You have to realize these people's pensions, which includes their livelihood, their medical coverage, their commissary and BX privileges, you know, the government controls all that, as do they mine, by the way. Doc had a friend, Dave, who was kind of a righteous kind of guy. He didn't drink or smoke, and I've met the guy. He kind of rubs you a little, but it's people that are too perfect make those imperfect people a little uncomfortable, I guess. But Dave was drinking sake and over in Okinawa with Doc, which is kind of surprising since Doc had never seen him drink before. And he explained to him that he didn't start drinking until his last reconnaissance flight over eastern Russia. When he returned, Dave was so delirious that his crew, and I don't mean flight crew, I mean support crew on the ground, had to pull him out of the aircraft. Dave didn't know when he had taken off, what had happened, or how he got back. He woke up 2 days later at the Naval Regional Hospital in Okinawa. To this day, he remembers nothing of the flight. But he's also, every night since this flight, had nightmares. And his words were, something got to me up there in the air. He still drinks. Oh, that's good or bad, but he didn't talk about it. He didn't tell the flight surgeon. In the military, if you go to the flight surgeon and they see anything at all that seems unusual or unstable, they ground you. And pilots will give up their families, body parts, and all their money to keep flying. If you've ever met them, especially test pilots and people that work black programs, that's what they live for. So he didn't talk to the flight surgeon. He self-medicated. And that's why there's so much alcoholism amongst cops and military, is because they don't want to help people, they just want them to follow the rules. Anyway, Dave, I actually looked up Dave. Gerald convinced him. What you have to understand is these people I talked to wouldn't talk to me over the phone. And of course, not a lot of people were emailing back when we started this in the early 90s. I actually had to talk around subjects over the phone and say, well, I'm going to be in your area, and Gerald vouches for me, or Doc vouches for me, or you know Sal, and they'd say, yes, I had a long conversation with Gerald or Sal or Doc, and I'll talk to you if you're out here. And usually it was in a bar or on a long walk where there was nobody within 20 feet. And that's why these people won't talk to reporters, because they know eventually somebody's going to find out who they are. But I spent 25 years in establishing my credibility. I've had 2-star generals give me a direct order when I was just a sergeant, that if I didn't tell them what, for example, Westinghouse engineer disclosed information to me about how they were messing up a program, that I'd be court-martialed, and I refused to do it. So these people knew if I gave them my word, no one would ever know who they really were. And that's why there's a unique take on this. You're getting a story that's built from people who have lived this technology and under this cloak of secrecy. I lived it for 25 years. And then I realized we were the government. Next slide. One day while at Nellis, we were informed there was an F-15 that had crashed out on the Nellis Range, which is near Area 51. This was in 1977. A lieutenant colonel who was a commander and a pilot, and Doc Walters, the hospital commander at Nellis, actually flew into the side of a mountain while doing a routine functional check flight. I've written about this story in detail in Alien Rapture. Sergeant who worked for me recovered the F-15 heads-up display film canister because he was assigned to the accident investigation team. He told me a guy in a dark jumpsuit from Washington, D.C. had immediately pounced on him and the camera when they recovered it out in the desert, which was very unusual because everything else that was picked up was standard procedures, was logged, marked, photographed, and taken back to an assigned hangar for analysis. At the time, I'm not sure, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Fairchild, was prototyping CCD cameras, which is, of course everybody has them now, but for the F-15. This F-15 had a prototype video camera on it. It also had a flight data recorder. This guy in the jumpsuit, when they were recovered, were turned over to him without question. So I don't know who he worked for, but I don't think he worked for the Air Force. A couple of weeks after the crash, Gerald, and in fact it's funny because the first time I ever met Gerald was at the Silver Dollar Saloon, and he didn't drink, but people with security clearances under a lot of pressure tend to drink or have other problems, and that's why he watched them. But Gerald had told me that Lieutenant Colonel, who was the pilot of the F-15 that had crashed, along with Doc Walters, radioed the Nellis Tower, and it said, and his words were, and I write everything down so I can quote other people instead of being glib. He said, "This extremely large thing is over my aircraft." Right on top of him, he screamed to the tower. And he informed them that he was experiencing total loss of flight systems. His communications went immediately dead. Less than 3 seconds after the communications ended, they flew into the side of a mountain. Check it out. It's in the newspapers. Back then there was lawsuits too. Gerald, who was probably the most connected person, I've known a lot of connected people. Before I got out of the defense industry, I could call up half of the CEOs or most of the VPs in any major defense contractor. But Gerald, I was in awe of him. He was so connected. Said that the video from the prototype CCD video camera showed that some type of oval vehicle of tremendous size was so close to the F-15 that it blocked out almost all light. He said that it was so close that the camera couldn't focus, and back then they were just experimenting with CCD cameras that had automatic aperture and focus and everything, but this had it, and it couldn't focus. So, we're talking about 10 feet. You can imagine that at doing 500 miles an hour. A little too close for comfort, obviously. Anyway, unfortunately, when the F-15 crashed into this mountainside, they tried to eject right before impact. The UFO was still on top of them, and their bodies were torn to shreds. Officially, as always is the case, pilot error. Of course, these guys were experts, but it didn't matter. Pilot error caused a perfectly functioning aircraft in clear airspace with maximum visibility to crash. These are just some of the type of stories that I was given and have used in Alien Rapture. Next slide, please. Nevada calls itself the Silver State, the Battleborn State, and the Sagebrush State. A more appropriate motto would be the conspiracy state. I wonder if this room is bugged by the casino. Of 111,000 square miles of land in Nevada, over 80% is controlled by the federal government, the highest percentage of any state in the union. If it were not for the gaming industry, the federal government would be the largest employer, with 18,000 military and another 20,000 government contractors working at places like the Nevada Test Site, the Nellis Range, the Fallon Naval Air Station, and the Tonopah Range, and the aerospace industry. And by the way, you'll probably hear this eventually with somebody that comes forward, but the Nellis Range is not the most classified facility, Area 51 or Groom Air Base is not the most classified facility in Nevada, and neither is the stuff around Papoose. EG&G provides classified research, development, and services for the military and government. EG&G supplied the technical and scientific support for nuclear testing and energy research and development programs. EG&G provided large diameter drilling and mining and excavation equipment for underground and mountainside facilities. They built these hidden bunkers, mountainside hangars, and vast underground facilities at Groom, Papoose, Mercury, and other places in Nevada. These facilities and observation posts are extremely well camouflaged. In fact, I keep wanting to tell you these little anecdotes, but I'm afraid we'll run out of time if I do. But we'll take some questions here. In 1972, EG&G was granted an indefinite contract called Project Red Light to support the DOE and military. It gave them responsibility to assist in recovery of nuclear materials in cases of mishaps and to provide aerial and ground security. Gerald said that they were also responsible to the DOE and NSA and the MJ-12 committee, whether or not you believe in that, for reacting to sightings of UFOs and crashed vehicles and recovery of alien artifacts, as they're called. Okay, so now you say, what's going on today? The Hillary platform, the Avro saucer, that's the Hillary platform, the Avro saucer, and the Northrop wings were aerospace vehicles where advanced technology which emulated UFO characteristics were tested. See the date that was flown? 1948? And everybody thinks the B-2 stealth bomber is just, you know, kind of funny. It looks a lot like it. Dr. Paul Hill, a lot of you probably read his book. He's now deceased. There's going to be a lot of that going around. Was a UFO investigator for NASA for over 30 years. Everything he wrote in his notes was classified top secret, and he couldn't publish it. But his book got out because his daughter published this manuscript. If you want some more technical information, I suggest you read his book too. Lockheed's Advanced Development Projects Division, known as the Skunk Works, developed the A-12 for the CIA. What's really funny is 30 years after they built the SR-71, it broke the land speed record from LA to New York in 1 hour and 4 minutes. And it still didn't fly its max classified speed or altitude. Area 51, the Groom Air Base facilities, has a 6-mile long runway, the longest in the U.S. The Department of Defense and the CIA used it for the Air Force's most exotic vehicles. You ask, why a 6-mile long runway? Well, up until the SR-75, the vehicles that came after that, you need a runway with high takeoff speeds because they also have very high landing speeds. They have 75-degree or more radical swept-back wings, but the newer vehicles don't need long runways. So they've moved out of Groom. My sources estimate that up to 35% of SDI funding was siphoned off to provide primary expenditures for the Air Force's most secret black program ever, which started in 1982. For those that haven't already figured it out, the Aurora program is not a vehicle. The Aurora program is a code name for the ongoing project to research and develop advanced aerospace vehicles. And there have been a number of them, and we'll get to that. For the last few years, high-tech buffs have speculated at least one new and exotic aerospace vehicle existed, the SR-75, the first operational Aurora program vehicle, went operational after 2 years of flight testing in 1989. The top secret SR-75 is a hypersonic strategic reconnaissance spy plane called the Penetrator. It is a mothership, which I'm getting into here. Hypersonic speeds, by the way, start at Mach 5. The SR-75 replaced the SR-71. Now, this thing's been flying operational for 9 years. This is old technology. The new SR-75, I call it new because it's new to a lot of people, is capable of positioning anywhere in the world in less than 3 hours. It carries multispectral sensors such as optical, radar, infrared, and laser. The SR-75 far exceeded the classified military speed and altitude records of the old SR-71. The SR-75 has attained altitudes of over 120,000 feet and speeds exceeding Mach 5 or 5 times the speed of sound. That's over 3,300 miles per hour. From takeoff to landing, the 75 can make a round trip from central Nevada at the time to northeast Russia and back in under 3 hours. I suggest if you're hurried, don't take the Concorde. Can everybody read that in the back? It's 162 feet long and 98 feet wide. The belly stands 10 feet off the ground. I know, Gerald was 6 feet, but 2 methane and LOX fuel, high bypass turbo ramjet engines are housed under each wing. Now, I'm going to skip to the next slide because I'm running behind. So you have to buy the book to read what I skipped. The SR-75 and the daughter ship SR-74 were built by Lockheed Advanced Development Company, which everybody knows is Skunk Works. And the SR-74 daughter ship is called the Scramp. It's kind of cute, huh? But it stands for Scramjet and Rocket Propulsion. The Scramjet is a supersonic combustion ramjet. Gerald and one other source witnessed the first flight of the SR-75 with the SR-74 piggyback out of Area 51 before my friend Glenn Campbell moved in up there and scared them all off. It was sitting piggyback the SR-75. And he said, I guess it was back as early as 1975 that he knew that they were developing the SR-75, which is pretty incredible. I guess it took them 12 or 13 years to get this thing flying right. So it must be some pretty good technology. The SR-74 can't take off from the ground. It has to be on top of the SR-75 above 100,000 feet altitude. Then it can attain orbital altitudes. The Scramp launches ferret satellites for the National Security Agency that weigh 2,000 pounds or less and measure 6 feet by 5 feet. But as you can imagine, the old satellites that were big as a van, you can pretty much now make one about the size of a briefcase. So you don't need booster rockets. The NASA space shuttle, I'm here to tell you, is really an antique by comparison. The joke is on us. If you think these rumors are far-fetched, look at the YB-49 and the XB-70, flown in 1948 and 1964, respectively. Now look at the SR-75, which has been spotted numerous times. You say the government can't keep a secret? Boy, you're wrong. There's new rumors from my sources that two new vehicles have been placed in permanent orbit. One of these vehicles is the Space Orbital Nuclear Service Intercept Vehicle, SUNSIV. When you hear it from another reliable source in 10 years, you'll remember this. It's codenamed Locust. The SR-74 and the TR-3B flying triangle can deliver spares, replacement units, service fuels, chemicals, and modules to the Sun Sieve, our locus. The robotic Sun Sieve uses deliverables to service, calibrate, repair, and replace parts on the newer NSA, CIA, and NRO Ferret satellites. And I know for a fact that they were developing a robotic repair of electronics equipment as far back as '81, because I worked a program to where they didn't want technicians looking at the equipment. Remember, I was in the forefront of automatic test equipment when they didn't even have a computer to automate anything with. Finally, I've saved the best for last, the operational model of the TR-3B. A friend of mine said he'd never forget the sight of the alien-looking TR-3B landing at Papoose, south of Groom. The pitch black triangular-shaped TR-3B is rarely mentioned, and then only in whispers. Next slide. The original TR-3B was 200 feet across, the prototype. It was codenamed Astra, and I was just informed by Jeff Rentz when I did his radio show that Astra has connections all the way back to the Indian flying vehicles several thousand years ago, which is interesting. They codenamed it Astra. The tactical reconnaissance TR-3B first flight was in the early 90s. The triangular-shaped, nuclear-powered aerospace platform was developed under the top-secret Aurora program. By 1994, there were $3 billion-plus operational models. The operational model is 600 feet across. This flying triangle is not fiction. If you don't believe me, ask the tens of thousands of people who have now spotted one version or another of it, from Belgium to England. Ken can tell you about people that have seen it in England to Arizona. The TR-3B vehicle's outer coating is reactive to electrical radar stimulation and can change reflectiveness, radar absorptiveness, and color. The polymer skin, when used in conjunction with electronics countermeasures and ECCM, can make the vehicle look like a small aircraft, flying cylinder, or even trick radar receivers into falsely detecting a variety of aircraft, an aircraft in another location, multiple aircraft, or no aircraft at all. The circular plasma field accelerator ring, called the magnetic field disruptor, surrounds a rotatable crew compartment. It's far ahead of anything you've ever imagined as far as technology. Sandia and Livermore Laboratories developed a reverse engineered MFD, and I believe the government will go at any lengths to protect this technology. But you're not going to be able to build one of these from what I tell you, nor am I. So the government will go to any lengths. Believe me, the plasma in this accelerator is mercury-based. It's pressurized at 250,000 atmospheres at a temperature of 150 degrees Kelvin, superconductivity, and accelerated to 60,000 revolutions per minute to create a superconductive plasma with a resulting gravity energy. The MFD generates a magnetic vortex field which disrupts and neutralizes the effects of gravity on mass within proximity by 89%. Do not misunderstand. This is not anti-gravity. Anti-gravity you can use as a propulsive force. The mass of the circular accelerator and all the mass within the accelerator, such as the crew compartment, avionics, MFD systems, fuels, environmental systems, and nuclear reactor, are reduced by 89%. This causes the effect of making the aircraft extremely light and able to outperform any aircraft yet constructed, except of course those we didn't build. TR-3B is a high-altitude stealth reconnaissance platform with indefinite loiter time. Once you get it up there at speed, it doesn't take much propulsion to maintain altitude. With the vehicle's mass reduced by 89%, the vehicle can travel at Mach 9 vertically or horizontally. So for those that have had sightings of things making right, and they're not perfect right turns, obviously. Nothing can make a perfect right turn. It's against the laws of physics. But it sure looks like a right turn at a distance. For those that have seen it, that's how they do it. The TR-3B uses 3 multi-mode thrusters mounted on each corner of the triangular platform. I was going to go into liquid hydrogen, oxygen, rocket engines, and all that. Next slide, but I'm not going to have any time here. The multimode propulsion system can operate in the atmosphere with thrust provided by the nuclear reactor, and in the upper atmosphere with hydrogen propulsion, and in orbit with combined hydrogen and oxygen propulsion. The original picture of the TR-3B was taken with a digital camera that was carried on a Special Operations C-130 out of Hurlburt Field. It was flying mission support for the TR-3B. The current picture, by the way, that was developed with 3D Studio from that digital picture hangs in the Black Vault at Lockheed. That's all I can tell you about that. Minimum of 4. Next slide. That is a C-130, by the way, that he was flying. Many sightings of UFOs are not alien vehicles, but top secret TR-3B, other Aurora vehicles. Next slide. That was the original digital picture. Next slide. I do have 25 minutes? Okay, I'm skipping along. So. Really? There's a lot of confusion, like the Aurora program being an aircraft. There's also a lot of confusion. I had this discussion with a pilot that was telling me that a TR-3B had to look like a TR-3A. That used to be the case, by the way. The TR-3B was modified. The TR-3 was a concept vehicle. Was modified to the TR-3A, which looks like a flat jelly bean, batwing shaped vehicle. I believe Bill Sweetman in the Aurora book pictured it. But the TR-3B has nothing in common with the TR-3A. That doesn't look anything like what Bill Sweetman pictured. And then there's a Tier 2, 3, and 4. There's also a TR-3C. And then there's Tier 3 minuses and Tier 3 pluses. And every one of these are distinctly different vehicles. And the government has done this. It's their shell game with nomenclature. So if you see a TR-3A and you see a TR-3B and you start comparing, you didn't see the same thing. And if you have heard from somebody a nomenclature and you're comparing, yeah, that sounds like the TR-3, you mean your TR, that it doesn't match up. Sneaky, aren't they? Before Gerald died, we had a long conversation. He was sure he had documentation that could prove the existence of reverse engineering of alien technology. We talked about a lot of things, but I don't know. I've published just almost everything that was given to me or passed on to me. I don't know what else he knew. He was obsessed with quasi-crystals, and I'm not even going to get into that because I'm not a physicist and I don't understand that. I also believe that Colonel Corso, do you like that picture? Whoever can really figure out what it really is, I'll buy you a Coke. You ever seen a convertible aircraft? Leave it there for a second. Can everybody see that? I'm going to just leave it here just for a second. I'm deviating from our program here. I received the MJ-12 documents from Dale, who I had mentioned earlier as one of my 5 closest friends for over 20 years. In fact, Dale and I knew each other from our first trip to Vietnam in '69. His father now has been, before he retired, put in 30 years, almost 30 years with the NSA and transferred over as a military officer. When I sent Dale a copy of the manuscript before I even got, shortly before Brad Steiger got involved with the project, he read, as did all my friends that were still around that gave me input, read a draft to make sure that I hadn't misquoted them or I hadn't given out any information they were uncomfortable with or they felt they could be identified with. So Dale was reading the manuscript and his dad and him were very close. Said, I'm going to give you some documents. And he says, they're blackened out. And he says, but I want you to retype them and where there's blacked out, just leave spaces. Dell's father is the one that passed on the MJ-12 documents to me. Okay, next slide. And we're going to get into this here. That's just a cool picture. I just thought I'd throw that in. That's supposed to be a wormhole in the TR-3B, and I tried to visualize what they were doing with these quasi-crystals, and that's my visualization. Okay, next. For the remaining time I have, I'm going to discuss the MJ-12 documents I received. There's already been a lot of controversy over this, and I'm just barely going to be able to scratch probably 2% of what's in the book. And I'm going to let y'all, any of the interested, read this while I take questions and answers. But I'll tell you this, a couple things when we get through them. These documents I received, and by the way, I've copyrighted every government document I've got my hands on or information, because I want the government to come forward and say, we have the copyright to that. Yeah. So, I hope they do. Okay, now, can y'all read that? Well, it's going to shorten my question and answer, but I'm going to read a couple things to you. The presidential order signed in 1987. Previous slide, back up just one real quick. The most fascinating things to me was, one, it's an unnumbered order, which, by the way, is not uncommon. This is not the only unnumbered presidential order there's ever been. You can find that out through research. And secondly, it's authorized by proxy. That's scary. It's like giving your ex your checkbook with all and a signature stamp. You know, it's like. Okay, next slide. By virtue of the authority vested in me as the chairman of the Mars Jupiter 12 Committee, an ultra-secret committee established by President Truman with full consent and permanent voting members of the Mars Jupiter 12 Committee, this presidential order by proxy is established as follows. Now, I'm not going to get in debate with anybody about what Majestic 12 stands for. This Mars Jupiter was on the document, and I know that a lot of people think it stands for a lot of other things. And I've been hearing, I'm not a UFO person. I was a technology person. I haven't read a lot of these books, but I heard there's a is it Sitchin that discuss 12th planet. So I believe these documents are real. Whether or not you believe them, it's your right. But Mars Jupiter 12 has never been used in with Majestic 12 or MJ 12. So I wanted to clarify that this is definitely different. I know it, you know it. And for those that think I might have mistyped something wrong, that's the way I got it. Charter. This is pretty scary stuff. There is hereby established a strategic group of key government personnel called the Mars Jupiter 12 Committee, referred to as MJ-12, with the authority to take any action to the maximum extent possible in relation to foreign or alien data, materials, information, technology, artifacts, and extraterrestrial biological entities, all hereafter referred to as foreign artifacts, which may bear upon the national security of the United States of America. Amendments to this charter and foreign artifacts, materials, and information shall be classified to the highest levels available to the U.S. government. The MJ-12 Committee's actions and directives will be referred to as a program outside the MJ-12 membership. The MJ-12 Committee shall have sole United States governmental authority to direct each FA aspect, foreign artifact, or substance, and to make sure that each foreign artifact, make such foreign artifact available to the President or the members of the MJ-12 Committee. Next slide. The several departments and agencies of the government and Department of Defense, as identified by the MJ-12 Committee, shall be notified by Department Directive to consider any foreign artifact as highly classified and alert DoD Foreign Technology Division immediately upon occasion of any incidents, happenstance, or encounter with foreign artifact. We now know what a foreign artifact is. We've seen a few of them. Next slide. Next slide. Before somebody really good at researching discovers the date on the go back one? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Before somebody just I'm sorry. I'm going to deviate from this just a second. I want to clarify something. Certain dates and names are left out of these documents. I personally fill them in. Brad and I talked about who was most likely the person. We did our best guess. But before somebody really good at research discovers that February 22nd is my birth date, I'm going to tell you it is. The year was in there, but not the date, so I put the February 22nd in. It's cool. It's George Washington's birthday. Now, the original MJ-12 documents presented by Brad Steiger, Stanton Friedman, and Shandera, I think I'm getting the name wrong, but referred to an attachment D, or autopsy report. Next page, next slide. These are just dates and names that are very similar to the original MJ-12 document. Next. The purpose of this preliminary postmortem examination is to determine the cause and manner of death, the origin of the entities, and the type of biological life form. We're not going to get to the meat if we don't move through this general stuff. Next one. This basically talks about unidentified debris, where it was crashed, who was there. Next slide. Now, what you have to remember is I received and copyrighted this information prior to 1994. This is before Corso ever wrote his first draft. It is before the alien autopsy film was known about, even by Tim Shawcroft, who I just did a video interview with last night, and they were the first to publish the alien autopsy. All this was copyrighted before anybody knew anything about things that have come since. And this is another thing that validates these documents, at least for me. One is the fact that they discussed that all the bodies were identical. And trust me, when the military says identical, we're talking identical. I'm not going to read the details because there's some highlights I want to get into. Next slide. You're talking about the covers. Don't go back, but on the previous page, at the end it said a dark, coarsely textured, flat, black, seamless, almond-shaped apparatus covers each eye with no apparent attachment points. For a lack of better description, eyeglasses or sunglasses come to mind. Perhaps their apparatus is an aid in distance viewing, blocking harmful solar radiation, enhanced spectrum detection, low light or infrared vision, or some other unknown use. Again, I'll make a point of this. Before Corso wrote about seeing these funny lenses, before the alien autopsy, the y'all that seen it, remember them peeling off these little black lenses for everybody that says aliens have black eyes. Well, these guys have been hanging around Hollywood because they're wearing shades. Okay? They are not their natural eyes. They have some type of lens. All this was copyrighted prior to 1994. We have documentation. We can prove it to anybody, just like I did the Brits. When they asked me if I could prove I did all the jobs, I said, I brought 200 documents. And it's all going to be on their film, by the way. So that, to me, it's just extremely fascinating to know that, I got all that document. I didn't even know what MJ-12 was, by the way, when I got these documents. Color me stupid. I just didn't know. The other point, other than eyes, this has never been discussed. It's a shame we can't talk to the government people that did the alien autopsy so they could spread a little disinformation. It says tiny lines run horizontally from head to foot, much like record grooves, but smaller, and are only discernible through a magnifying glass or microscope. To me, the only reason you'd have something like that is if this thing was a manufactured being, which would also explain why they're identical, and for energy absorption of wide spectrum. And the other thing that, since we can prove this was copyrighted long before this other stuff, it says at the bottom, one large geo organ is present. How many of y'all remember on the cadaver of the alien, on the alien autopsy, and they opened it up and there was one kind of round organ in the middle that just looked like, you know, one of those stupid donut tires they put in your trunk that never work? So, I mean, here again you have my belief from my sources and documents that we copyrighted that the alien autopsy was done under the direction of the government. And it was done as close as possible to the real thing. Because the best lie is always the lie that's closest to the truth. What would convince you more? I mean, if they'd had a triangular shaped being with 12 legs, and it's supposedly the real autopsy, or one that was identical to the real autopsy, except it had an extra finger. To me, the one with the extra finger would confuse people far more than a better looking film of something really bizarre. By the way, psychological operations is an industry in the military. And there are thousands of people that work in it, and they're good at it. So, I'm going to take questions, and you can put up the next slide for them to look at, because they don't want to look at me anymore. How much time do I have, or am I out? Okay. I promised you, if you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, please.
You have that?
Okay, two questions I have. Number one, you are going to discuss reverse engineering on alien materials. Are you going to get into that?
Okay, I have 8 minutes, but here, I'll tell you what I know. Gerald said that the guy that worked for him as a national security investigator was at Groom when they tested the accelerator of the TR-3B the first time. And it's probably one of the more fascinating stories I've ever heard in my life. They said they strapped down this 200-foot accelerator. He was explaining it. He says, imagine a really fat hula hoop with big weights around it where the superconductive magnets. They bolted this thing down with bolts that were 2 feet across into concrete. The chain links were 6 feet. I mean, if you can imagine a chain link out of steel. They bolted this thing down. He said he couldn't believe it. It was just like the Manhattan Project. They didn't know if this thing was going to burn a hole through the earth, set off a chain reaction in the atmosphere, or take out everybody in northern and central Nevada. They turned this thing on, and they've got, I mean, dozens of cameras, people hidden around places where they could watch the cameras, and they held their breath, and nothing happened. Nothing. $20 billion to develop this accelerator from 1965. And I know a guy that worked at General Dynamics when they, and they might have been doing it before that, but I can track it back as far as 1965. You know, that much time, that much money, and did nothing. However, they figured out after a while, I guess somebody must have walked up to it like, you know, a car that won't start and kicks the tire. They figured out the thing was 89% of the mass and weight was reduced. So what do you do when you have a flying saucer that you tried to build? It's kind of like the Indians if we drove up a Model T back in the American Indians and say, hey, you can build all these you want. And they'd go, thanks a lot. But we built this accelerator trying to emulate saucer-like technology. And we only achieved part of its effect. So what do you do when you have a circle that's real light and you can put a lot of stuff in it without adding weight to it? How do you propel it? There's only one way. You hang a triangle on it and you put 3 engines, conventional multi-mode rocket engines. Of course, they're very advanced. And you fly this circle around with the crew and reconnaissance and cameras and everything else in it. That's just one of the things that I hope to explain to you good people is there is a flying triangle, but it's ours. The flying triangles are not theirs. Aliens don't transverse the universe or come from another dimension and take the time to redesign their technology that they've had for eons. We have redesigned their technology and we can't get it to work right. So we put a triangle on it. It's just very simple.
On the Aurora, which you have now explained is a project, not a thing, one of the vehicles is reputed to be a diamond-shaped object that comes in over the West Coast at in excess of 4,000 miles an hour. Do you know anything about that particular vehicle?
I've heard rumors, but I don't have anybody I trust that's told me anything about it that I could discuss it. But you have to understand that as far back as late in Vietnam War, we could make a radar signature on any radar in the world, see anything they wanted, with electronic countermeasures and ECCM, which is countermeasures. We now have stealth coatings that can put any type of camouflage for visual observation. Generators, by the way, and I don't have time to get into this, but at Papoose, where they store one of the TR-3Bs and they maintain these as their depot, it's built into the side of a mountain, cut out of stone. They have a holographic generator that generates the side of the mountain, and when you're 10 feet from the side of this mountain and looking into the hangar, you can only see a mountain. And that's why when the Russian satellites fly over to verify the SALT treaty, when their infrared and other spectral scanners shoot down at Groom, they only see stone, because that's all that's there. I'm sorry.
Okay, a couple of questions that should have short answers. First one is, what do you think of Bob Lazar's story, and what the other previous gentleman just said? You're basically saying all we have from the reverse engineering is a flying triangle, so you're basically saying we do not have saucers. If we do, then they're extraterrestrial, which ties in with the Bob Lazar story. The other part is, last year Popular Science did an article that some of the black projects from Area 51 have been relocated to north central Utah. The reason being given is that the 1950s nuclear tests in the Area 51 have been kind of...
me on the first question.
Oh.
Let's stop there for a second.
Oh, okay.
First of all, everybody asks me about Bob Lazar, and I don't have anything negative to say about anybody I've never met, and I wouldn't say anything in public. But my only explanation is... he might have seen the accelerator, which is a saucer. Okay. The second thing is, I showed the Brits last night, and I'm not going to make a habit of doing this, so they've got it on film. Almost 200 documents showing that I had crypto, special access, special programs to verify my credibility. Nobody has ever mentioned the goggles. If I forget everything I've ever known about black programs, I'll never forget feeling nauseous from wearing those damn things. So how do you forget something that causes you discomfort every time you leave a building? Okay. As far as Utah, absolutely. Yeah. There's nothing top secret at Groom anymore. The only thing that's left there is the stuff they've moved south that only need short runway or no runway.
So that story is basically bogus, that they did not move anything to north central Utah.
I don't know where they moved them to. I've disassociated myself from all the government 3 years ago to protect everybody I ever knew. My information is 3 years old. Don't know anything new. Don't want to know anything new.
Okay.
If Nellis isn't the most secret facility in Nevada, which is?
If you'd been listening, and I know I refer to my notes a lot, but this was done in a hurry. I had a lot of pressing things. The Defense Advanced Research Center. It's the coolest acronym in the world. Mm-hmm. DART. Mm-hmm. There's 10 stories underground, and I'm talking about massive amount of square feet, south of Papoose. It was all built by EG&G.
Okay.
That's the most classified place in Nevada, and I keep getting all these.
Okay. One more. If the triangle is so super secret, why did they fly it over Europe for everyone to see?
Okay, imagine as we will, and I'm stopping, and she's giving me that look. The War of the Worlds broadcast, the Brookings and Rands studies that we couldn't handle it. They're testing the waters, I suspect. I don't know. I don't have any information on that. I thank you so much for your kindness in having me.